Alright, gang. Hi, it's Cambrian. I've just finished watching Season 3, Episode 1, Chapter 16 of The Mandalorian for the second time. And I took some notes and I wanted to share where I got to. So before I begin, one of the things I found with this show is from watching other people's reviews is the effects of the damage done is immense, and it's not allowing people the freedom to judge the episode on its own merits. I'm not going to try to convince anybody, but I am going to point out the story plots that came out to me that I believe pretty much most people have missed. And the reason being, for much of the theorizing I've seen, there's been very little accuracy. A couple of general things, but mostly, not. Okay, I'm not theorizing about plot as a whole, details, this kind of thing. I'm looking at the more general basics of signs of the show being able to be made and work towards its potential, unfettered from the dark, shadowy Sith-like overwatch of Kathleen Kennedy. So if there's any truth to the rumors, it will show in the product if they are unfettered. So if they are able to move forward unfettered, that essentially makes season 1 and season 2 unfree seasons. They were not free to reach their full potential. They had to do the whole Luke Skywalker thing in utter secrecy. Utter secrecy. That's not a way to produce a show when you have to, in order to do the right thing for serving your audience, especially something that's made to the specifications of the quote-unquote original recipe, as I like to call it. Not original trilogy recipe, but Star Wars recipe. So that's original recipe. And for me, Star Wars recipe is the OT, the PT, a bunch of the cartoons and whatnot, and the EU in its entirety is all original recipe stuff. Because it all did so at varying degrees. Like even the worst stuff from the EU and even OT era, like some of the worst Marvel comics, were leagues ahead of even the best trash that Kathleen Kennedy's efforts put out. And that's unfortunate. But here we have before I go further, I know how those of you who are hurt are feeling. I have felt it myself, but I can't linger in darkness. It's not good for me, and I'm looking for hope. I know Favreau gets it. Filoni has a good grasp of it, but he doesn't quite get it yet, which is why, even though he's been there for 25 years, he's never been able. He's got Ahsoka and a fairly decent show to call to his credit, whereas Favreau has a few decades worth of film and television, writing, directing, and acting experience to draw from. He's got a wealth of skill and experience and talent. Filoni has schooling in Lucasfilm. He kind of knows how to write a story, and and the Clone Wars was really good. But his main contribution, his main notable contribution has been Ahsoka, a quality character. And I think Omega, like Ahsoka, starts off not really liked, and after enough time, grows on you. And I think that's what we are seeing again here. Fortunately, like I've said before, it's unfortunately they tried to repeat that particular gag, but they have. So we go with it. That's not an unforgivable thing. Okay, so now I'm going to get to my plot points. In order to do this, I couldn't go by anyone else's standard theorizing, so I had to go by a different basis. And that basis being, what does the brand need? And my first instinct after The Last Jedi was that Luke Skywalker is a brand representative character that is profitable. It has to be repaired. Without a doubt, the character has to be repaired. He has to be brought back to his best state. And they did that at the end of season 2 of The Mandalorian. The Mandalorian's the only one that's listening to the fans. So I'm not trying to convince them. Whatever. For this, I am purely following to see what they do. I want to see this unfettered. So let's get to my notes as to the things people missed because of two factors. Essentially the PTSD, for lack of a better term, for the relationship damage of all the fracturing thanks to Kathleen Kennedy, poor story writing, inadequate writers, and blah blah blah, and all that stuff. It's clouded people's ability to see things for what they are, judge things based on their merits, and some people just being frustrated, kind of like how Doomcock is versus RMB over season 3 of Picard. And Doomcock has every right to not go any further with it for his reasons, because technically, as decent a quality as season 3 of Picard might be, it is still technically under the auspices, even if he has nothing to do with it, of Kurtzman. And Kurtzman, like Kathleen Kennedy, have abused the brand, abused sensible storytelling, and abused fans. That's unforgivable. And he has every right to say no. I don't forgive Kathleen Kennedy. She's not going to be forgiven. But, and I don't have to forgive her. What she did was unforgivable. It was pure vandalism. Spiteful vandalism. She tried to dismantle a man's life work and tried to make what he created her own in her image. And that's blasphemous in geek culture. Anyway, enough of that. But all of these things did lead to a clouded veil that doesn't allow the freedom to try to enjoy this for many people. So so now I've got my notes and I'm going to share what I missed. Or sorry, not what I missed, but what I think everybody else missed. Okay. Okay, relevant plot points missed to all the hurt and damage. The Watch, the Mandalorian cult are not, we know that they're not the main Mandalorian faction or cultural norm. The group we saw of the Watch on the beach as the Croc shows up, they're all made up of Mandalorians from different houses, Vizsla and this and that, whatever. They're not all Vizsla, because then it would be House Vizsla, not the Watch. So these are disillusioned Mandalorians who found the armorer, who is, if my lore is correct, and I'm trying to attach to so much detail from the Clone Wars, comes from Darth Maul, from his time as ruler of Mandalore. So, that being the case, Din Djarin would not necessarily be aware of this detail. There's no sign of horns on him or anyone else. People look for things to latch onto. I can see even soldiers doing this. And if somebody's offering some form of organization, which the armor seemed to be doing, there you go. But here you have them on the beach, still very much without roots, nowhere to go. They're on the road. They have to keep kind of moving, and they're very I hate to use the word gypsy-like, because they have to be. They have to be able to. The last time we saw them last season, or at least in the Book of Boba Fett, they weren't here. They were on, they were on the ring, the Halo ring, which was a cool space. But they were there, and now they're not there. Like, the armor was setting up her forge. I'm sure you got to set up your gear, like setting up your mobile camping stuff, whatnot, as you move around. But that's a lot to go and do and have to do on a constant basis. That's an instability that, when they take the time to observe their Mandalorian tradition, or at least the Watch's tradition, in this case, some people didn't understand what it was. Well, it's a rite of passage for those who are into history and have, come across details on tribes and Vikings and whatnot. There are rites of passage. This kind of thing is at the end of a rite of passage, where the creed is sworn into, where it's the end. It's right at the end. Like, the kids right at the edge, the cusp of their tweens, or just about to turn 13, kind of deal, and they're on the cusp of adulthood. Or they were a youngling. Or, sorry, not a youngling, a foundling. We don't know which. So it could be a foundling, because we have seen in season 1 episodes where a couple younglings running around were smaller than these ones, than the one we saw getting the helmet presented to them. So probably a foundling, which seems to be how the Watch grows. Anyway, it doesn't recruit or have births like a house would. It seems to only grow by the leftovers of society. So it's in a very fragile state. They can't even pick a safe place, because they can't take the time to survey it to find out if it's safe, and they accidentally, like the Millennium Falcon, taking a break, hiding in an asteroid, turned out to be unsafe. And in the belly of a giant space worm inside that space asteroid apple. And they had to get out of there. Same thing was here, only because of that, the forced nature of being nomadic, forced nomadism, that the armor demonstrates lack of leadership, because they're not even trying to find a less inhabited planet that has some infrastructure, but nobody cares about the Mandalorians, as in to bother them or have no problem with, and aren't gonna, and it's far away from even Imperial remnant influence, to try to make a base, a place with water, food, shelter, defensible, has everything they need. You're not trying to replace Mandalore, you're trying to start a place to start again from, and the armor isn't doing that. And along comes the Mandalorian, Din, who has been slowly accruing for himself, replacing assets with newer assets, and he's bringing with him capability. And after later on, after meeting with Bo-Katan, who's also disillusioned, like all the members of the Watch and every other Mandalorian that's scattered to the three winds, everybody's got a different view of what's what. And because everything's lost, the planet's lost, Bo-Katan, it didn't win, her plan didn't work. She's just discovered she's not the leader she thought she was. And she's coming to terms with that. and she's depressed, and she's like, people go, oh, yeah, she's just being a spoiled, whiny brat. No, this is somebody who she bet her entire life on the goal of becoming the leader with the Darksaber, and that, by a matter of circumstance, was taken away from her utterly, and the effects of her not returning with what she promised, something she knew she had to earn and was not, she she got too full of herself. She assumed that she would get the Darksaber, assumed her machinations would do the thing. But she didn't find Moff Gideon, did she? It was Mando. It was Mando who convinced her to come along, and she went along still with that goal in mind, not realizing that Moff knew that Mando was coming for him. Bo-Katan didn't know that he sent that message to Moff Gideon. So when they did show up, when it did happen, all Moff Gideon had to do was walk from the bridge down to the holding cell. Because Bo-Katan would assume him being on the bridge from a surprise attack. Now, that's not Din ruining her chances or ruining her surprise, at least not intentionally. That was circumstance. As a member of the Watch, Din did not know about the details of the Darksaber or what it takes for someone to lead it, or where in the stages of those laws where Bo-Katan was. Bo-Katan was already beyond the ability to be given it. She had lost it, and the only way she could get it back would be through combat. The combat happened. The combat she needed to win was for her to defeat Gideon. She could have done that because she has a similar level of skill and equipment equal to Din, and could have gotten the Darksaber if Gideon had been on the bridge. But because of Din's lack of knowing anything about the Darksaber, being a part of a cult that's not a part of Mandalorian culture, you've got a frustrated, disillusioned guy who had everything taken away from him and what he valued, over taking off his bloody helmet and over something good, connecting with a child. So I am positive that there's truth on Mandalore, and that truth being that place isn't a radioactive wasteland. And Din doesn't want to be King Arthur here, because that's what the Darksaber is. It's King Arthur. Whoever wields the sword leads, and that's whoever has Excalibur is king or queen. Din has the Darksaber. He won it fair and square through combat, but didn't know that he'd won it. He just disarmed an opponent who had a weapon that was a cultural heirloom. That's it. That's all he knew. So his spoiling the surprise attack for Bo-Katan is purely innocent, and whether or not Bo-Katan knows about that transmission or not is going to affect how she sees things, because Bo-Katan could turn dark or she could fall apart. But Bo-Katan is also a doer, not someone who sits around. She'll find a new purpose once she gets over herself. So next time we see her, she'll have kind of come to grips with things, still be a little less, she'll be not so enthusiastic, but she won't be a bump on a log. She'll be moving towards, and then the next time we see her after that, she'll have something to do again, something to believe in. And probably by that point, Din will have done something to assemble his round table of knights, or in this, for his King Arthur plot. I haven't seen anything yet in this episode. There wasn't anything in this episode to suggest where things are going to go with Grogu from here. Um, I did like at the beginning while they were traveling through hyperspace and Din's asleep and Grogu's looking out the window and you can see the shapes of the space whales and the mist. Talk about that's a clever way to foreshadow, you know, okay, the EU stuff and the post Clone Wars era animation stuff is starting to amalgamate and knit or be shuffled together, and that's what that foreshadow promises. How that's going to be delivered, I am not even going to attempt to theorize on that. Not because I can't, but it's pointless if you want to be able to enjoy what's coming down the pike. Alright. The armorer, when she was defending the random Mando from the space croc, um, I heard some people kind of react to, oh, Mary Sue, blah, 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 blah. Yeah, no, that was a leader, regardless of the origin of her cult, is still a Mandalorian trying to save another Mandalorian when there's so few left, and especially so few a part of the Watch. She did so because that's what a leader does. Well, even while on the other side of the coin of her leadership is utterly failing because she hasn't found a defensible place to start at least a new home for that cult. So she's a good leader in combat, but a bad leader in leading a people. She's not good at leading people like a good leader would, but she could be a great leader in a small group where the real responsibilities of the remnants of a society or rebuilding a society are not hers to handle. There are others more capable of that, more suitable to that, and she could get back to, if they set up a home base somewhere and they keep able to keep it secret enough, they could actually set down some new roots somewhere. But she didn't take those risks, so she's been a detriment, not to the tenets of Mandalorian culture that are shared amongst all of Mandalorians, but the few facets that came from Darth Maul are the ones that are screwing up her potential to be a good Mandalorian leader. And these are demonstrated in this episode, in the scenes that she's in. Distracted by a few misplaced though correct words in the opening talk between Din and Grief Karga, it is missed that Karga's intent is to build the prestige of Navarro. Mando is an asset to that goal. Yes, it's explained in right clearly in the dialogue, but what I mean is people were too distracted by the words to see that they were setting up Karga as a bigger character. And when the goons show up in the alleyway to do their, after school cartoon, Saturday mornings cartoon, G.I. Joe, Transformers, Silverhawks, Thundercats, He-Man and the Masters of the Universe villains, mid-season villains, or, quarter through the season villain kind of deal, mid-level boss stuff. This is what we're talking. And it's also, that's all for building out the world to come that we haven't seen yet. And while the seaweed on the pirate captain was a little on the nose, saying "R" was a bad move, bad call. One of the biggest aspects of this entire episode that was missed by everybody who had one of the smaller, the minor griefs, or minor peeves or whatever that they didn't like that were blown out of proportion, like the captain with the seaweed hair and making the connection, like the obvious connection to Pirates of the Caribbean. Yeah, that was a little low-hanging fruit, but it wasn't horrible. It wasn't horrible. The aspect that everyone's missing is that while there's more than enough content in here aimed at the adult fans, Star Wars, regardless if it's a film or TV show, has to remain not made for children, but accessible to children. Like the copious absence, the absence of copious amounts of gore and blood, for instance. Or if there is such things when they do show up, like when the Great Dragon got exploded, there was no red blood. You saw some purples and, candy, cotton candy pudding color, things going on, but there wasn't any, there was some goo, but there wasn't gore per se. And when it was shown, like from the high above shot, where you see the kind of like the splash outward from, the gaping exploded wound, you only see it for a split second. Just like in A New Hope, when Obi-Wan cuts off the bar, what's his face's freaking arm, and you see it on the floor with a little bit of blood, but other than that, it's gone really quick. You're only seeing it for as long as it needs to get the point across about the efficiency of a lightsaber at that, because it had only just been introduced at that point. So that was the first time we see a lightsaber, and after Luke turns one on. So that's the first time we see one in use, practical, applicable use as a weapon. So here we get to see everything as it's presented, from characters to stuff, kind of not only proving its worth, like Karga really proved his worth, not better than he did in season 2 when he shot his own guild members, but he gave more depth. The lines were a little better, except for those standout couple of words between the two of them. They have to come up with a thing for that, because it's just too Earth. It's not Star Wars enough. So, it could be like a temporary exile kind of thing, or some variant of an exile that's not apostate, because that's too Earth religious. Even though it applies across so many things, it's a little too earthy. Just a little too real world earthy. I should have read more directly from my notes. I'm rambling a little bit, and I'm sorry for that. We haven't even reached halfway. Well, I'm not going to touch on that. The main point is, when it comes to the maturity of the show, we can see how, as the two swapped in episodes that we saw in the book of Bubba Fetta, Fake Fett, demonstrated the depth of the seriousness as far as action and violence is concerned, and that was satisfying. And we saw that again demonstrated here in season 3, episode 1. But everything still must be accessible to children down to a certain age where it's appropriate for them to view this kind of action and violence. So you're looking at, to use 80s references, Thundercats, G.I. Joe as a low point, closest to kids, where the stories and stuff are baked down enough, removed of any political leanings, and just simple, basic ethical and moral lessons had stories framed around them to be told. That's what's happening here. Now, the opposite side of the scale of maturation, for a good comparison, is the difference between those 80s cartoons and, say, Japanese 80s cartoons. Robotech, being Macross adapted for Western audiences, had that cartoon action overlaid with a serious World War II worthy level conflict, where they told stories based in that, similar to Star Wars, how Star Wars has, to introduce kids to a more the next level up of the same kind of frameworks of these story points that build upon the ones geared definitely towards kids, like Transformers, G.I. Joe, where all those good things were, taught without messaging. Simple basics. Don't steal, don't lie, don't cheat, don't this, don't that. Treat people with respect, and judge people on their character. These are the kind of lessons that are acceptable messaging. The stuff that enables delusions or mental health issues, as we've seen interjected in recent years, they do nothing but separate and deny and screw up story. So here we have all those nasty elements really gone. And even when Babu Frick shows up, like, that's going to be great for the kids. One of the things I had to keep in mind when watching this the first time is that in order for me to see its potential from serving the audience, from adult fans who saw it as kids or teenagers or even young adults back then, to now, they were kids once. And I was a kid. I was 4 years old in 77 when Star Wars came out. I wasn't old enough to see it. And I didn't see it till after I saw Empire. And I saw A New Hope and Empire for the second time in a double bill. So I got to see the first one finally after Empire being my first full Star Wars experience. Like, I knew the story from coloring books, comics, and storybooks and storybook records and stuff. I had a couple of those things. So I knew the first movie story. I saw the pictures. I knew the tale. I knew the lines. But I didn't experience it until I saw Empire. In order for me to understand whether or not this show is serving the audience, I had to put myself into not the headspace, but the perspective that I had back then. And a good example of, and a lot of people are going to hate this, but a good example of serving the kids and accessibility, aside from the violence and the action, was the Babu Fricks showing up. I can't remember what the hell they're called, so I'm just going to call them the Babus. That was an excellent use of a already pre-existing prop that is otherwise collecting dust and not serving any purpose. So they can replicate that prop, redress the original one, make a couple more, and you've got a garage full of puppets that can interact on a same story level with Grogu, who is a puppet. That is going to appeal to